Good evening. Thank you for joining us. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of days about the act called AFSPA. Just a quick, breakdown for our audience. This is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It allows basically the armed forces to step in as police in areas where the government deems to have a sensitive or a touch and go sort of law and order situation, right? So in India, this particular act is in place in several places, in Jammu and Kashmir, in Nagaland, in some parts of Manipur, for example, some parts of Arunachal Pradesh, and it's been an issue for a fair amount of time. We now have the problem that has brought it into attention again this weekend, where 14 civilians were killed over the weekend in first of all, a special forces operation that went horribly wrong, where they shot at a van that was carrying civilian minors in a case of what was confirmed as mistaken identity by the Home Minister in Parliament. After which, there were crowds of people that gathered, angry crowds of people that gathered, who were fired upon again in self-defense by the forces, and more people died. So a total of 14 deaths have been reported so far. We also know that the Nagaland police has filed an FIR on attempt to murder, and they're conducting an investigation, and an SIT has been brought into force by the Naga government to investigate. So what we want to try and understand is, first of all, what kind of powers does this act give the armed forces in places like Nagaland? Does it allow the police, for example, to investigate, question, and drop a report? The Supreme Court has given us a judgment back in 2016 on AFSPA as well. What impact does that have? And is it really time for government to repeal AFSPA? This is what the Nagaland state government has asked the central government to do right now. So our aim is to try and understand all of this. To help me answer these questions, we have Mr. Sanjay Hegde, Senior Advocate at the Supreme Court, and Lieutenant General Hasnain, who joins us, who is an expert, from the Army, former GOC 15 Corps of Srinagar. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Hegde, if I may start with you, please. Would you explain to our audience what powers this act allows the armed forces in peacetime civilian areas where it is brought into force?
You're muted, Sanjay sir.
Sorry. The act came into force particularly arising out of events in the Northeast in the 1950s. It first came in with regard to Manipur and certain disturbed areas of what was the then undivided province of Assam. It gave special forces to the armed forces, and the core of the act is Section 4, which says that any commissioned officer, warrant officer, non-commissioned officer, or any other person of equivalent rank in the armed forces may, in a disturbed area, if he's of the opinion that it is necessary to do so for the maintenance of public order, after giving due warning as he may consider necessary, fire upon or otherwise use force even to the causing of death against any person who's acting in contravention of any law. So essentially, it gives powers to any, even a non-commissioned officer of the army in a disturbed area, if he apprehends something, to shoot after giving whatever warning he thinks necessary. He can also destroy any arms dump, etc., etc. He can arrest without warrant any person who has committed a cognizable offense or against whom suspicion exists, or enter and search without warrant any premises to make any such arrest as aforesaid, or recover any person. Now, anything which is done under this act is protected because no prosecution, suit, or other legal proceeding shall be instituted except with the previous sanction of the central government against any person in respect of anything done or purported to be done under exercise of these powers. So supposing somebody shoots, you cannot prosecute him, you cannot file a civil suit against him, except if you have the central government's permission to do so. And it's a truth that the central government rarely gives permission. So that is what it is. the center says, look, the armed forces are not necessarily used for police duties, but in certain disturbed areas, we use them in a variety of situations. If they take any operational decisions on the ground, they will be rendered immune from prosecution or from any legal proceedings unless the center specifically authorizes it.
Mr. Hegde, in this particular case, and I'm going by the Home Minister's statement in Parliament, he said that there was a tip-off that there would be movements of insurgents. He said that the van that was carrying these daily wage miners back home from work didn't stop when it was asked to stop, which is why it was assumed that this van was carrying extremists. They were then fired upon, and the following two openings of fire were done in self-defense. He acknowledged that this was a case of mistaken identity. Do you believe that it requires or it merits investigation?
Of course, it cannot go uninvestigated. The question is, who is to investigate?
Right.
The army says that, look, we have already launched our own investigation. We will have our own proceedings under army law. And whatever we deem necessary, we will do. The state administration says, look, it's our civilians who have died. Our policemen will also investigate, and we will take such action as is necessary. Now, the state police cannot go further beyond a point, except if there is cooperation from the army and sanction from the central government at the necessary stage. Right now, this is all in a preliminary stage.
And, Mr. Hegde, and I'll bring in, General Hasnain in a second, but we've had these conversations in the past when it has come to overreach and excess by the police, where if you have the police investigating the police, the possibility of that reaching a logical, impartial conclusion is fairly slim. Now, I know this is an unpopular question to ask, but do you believe that if the army were to investigate the army actions here, would it be a completely impartial investigation, or at least to the satisfaction of civil society that has to live under that army, sort of rule in these parts of the country?
See, let me put it this way.
May I answer that?
I will come to you. I just want his answer, and then you can respond, because I know that you want to respond to him.
Okay.
No.
Who do you want? Okay.
No,
I'm not sure who you want us to answer.
No, I want Mr. Hegde to answer, and then I'll bring that to you, and then I have a bunch of questions for you as well. So, Mr. Hegde first, please.
See, I do think, and I give credit to the army, that sometimes it does a much more honest job than what happens in civil circumstances. But there is also the question of institutional loyalty, trade union solidarity, or whatever you call it. So sometimes a man or an institution being a judge in its own cause is not necessarily healthy, nor does it carry credibility. And particularly in these disturbed areas, which were disturbed anyway to begin with, if a fair job is not seen to be done, they get all the more disturbed. Every such unanswered investigation or an unsatisfactory investigation then leads to more incidents. So this is a call for both the army as well as the government to take.
Right. General Saab, go ahead.
Right. Firstly, let me say that the army is not there of its own accord. It's been called there, it's been empowered there, right? A mistake has been made, the army has admitted its mistake, right? There were good old days when the army would never admit its mistake, perhaps, many years ago. But today
Good
the
old
army,
days?
or maybe many years ago, but I won't go into that. But today the army doesn't ever hold back. It will admit if there's a mistake, because with no transparency ultimately is the best solution. Now I can give you my own example. As a brigade commander, I was asked to investigate an alleged rape of a young mother and her daughter by an Indian Army officer. Would I have in my mind that I must protect this officer at all costs? No question. I mean, I am the presiding officer of a court-martial. I'm going to be investigating and looking at it, and I'm fully aware that I am in the eye of the glare. The army, you have to understand one thing, Faye, the army in 99% of the cases will be transparent and will be fair. I don't say that 100% it will be there. There may be an odd case which can happen, right? Now, in this particular case, you see, they have already gone ahead with the establishment of the court of inquiry headed by a major general, right? Whether the Nagaland police investigates or not is up to the central government, as earlier also said by Mr. Sanjay Hegde. It is up to the central government if it gives the sanction for investigation. It will have to give a separate sanction subsequently for prosecution if it is required at all. But the first step is that there's an in-house inquiry which is being conducted by the Indian Army, and we should await the results of that. That's a normal thing, and I think the reputation of the Indian Army is at stake, and everyone is aware of this within the army. Yeah.
General Saab, I want to just bring your attention to two things. There was a bench in 2016, the Supreme Court headed by Justice Madan B. Lokur, which examined the plea that was placed before it, asking for investigations into 1,528 deaths in the state of Manipur, which were alleged fake encounters involving the army and the police. The bench then said that there has to be inquiries that are independent of the armed forces. Now, Justice Lokur, who's now retired, spoke with NDTV yesterday, and he did say that it won't be enough to have the army investigate the army. He did say that it won't be enough to have the police investigate the army because they do not have the right powers. It has to be an independent group of people who are constituted to investigate. Do you agree with him?
No, you see, I am all for the rule of law. See, anything which will assist in the rule of law. I don't want a situation where the army protects the army. I don't want a situation where the civil police or any other investigating agencies, for the sake of it, for sake of sending home a message to civil society, etc., also conducts an awkward kind of an inquiry which is not completely transparent, not completely correct. So I am all for the right thing to be done. If it is warrants that an investigation be carried out in this manner, it's up to the central government. The central government has got the powers. You see, this is not a draconian law in that sense that people all call it draconian. It's been made out to be a draconian law. A perception has been created that it's a draconian law. But there are only two aspects in this law which are really important. One is empowerment. It empowers the army to take over police powers, right? It can conduct operations without having to refer to the police or refer to the magistrate who's present there. The second thing is that in the pursuit of these operations, if a genuine mistake is made, and it's an important aspect that it has to be in the pursuit of operations. In this case, there's no doubt about it that it was in the pursuit of operations. A genuine mistake is made. Who establishes whether it is genuine or not genuine? If a mistake has been made, then it is up to the central government to order investigation and subsequent prosecution. That's the essence of this law and nothing more than that. So I think a transparent investigation is an essential. Let it be done. But I don't see any reason why a court of inquiry of the Indian Army should be considered as doubtful.
Mr. Hegde, do you agree, with what Justice Lokur said in NDTV yesterday, and with the General Saab's opinion that there's no reason why a court of inquiry constituted by the army should be considered doubtful?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a couple of lines from Faye's. Munsif bhi wahi, muddai bhi wahi, kisse wakili kare. That is the real problem. That if an institution is a judge in its own cause, then it does lack credibility, and particularly in circumstances in a disturbed area. Now, would the Naga people, who quite frankly were in talks with the Indian government about something which was almost subnationalism with their own flag and various things, would they be satisfied when they are told that, look, your police cannot investigate. It's only the army which is doing it. Trust the army. The response from the civilian would be, trust is what has got us to this position, hasn't it? Because, look, you can have a mistake in identity in the first incident. But thereafter, the concealing of the bodies, sitting on them and trying to shoot your way out of trouble, that shows a great lack of leadership, to say the least. It shows a lack of many other qualities or un-army-like qualities, if I may use that expression. So the first 6 deaths, maybe, but the subsequent ones are, at least on a prima facie view, you would need more than many a clever lawyer to get over that.
General Saab, this is actually part of a report that has come out by the head of police of the state of Nagaland, that after, and the report basically says that after the first 6 deaths, there was an attempt to cover up, to put a tarp on the van and drive it out of there. It was only after the crowd accumulated in that area, there was an attempt to shoot their way out of that situation as well. Would you, and you did say in your previous answer, you said that it's important because everybody's watching, the army has a reputation to uphold as well. In that case, and given the incident that we're talking about, would you say here that in order to maintain trust in what is known as a sensitive area, it's important to conduct an investigation that is open to public? And that brings me to the next question. If the army did conduct an investigation on its own, would that report be open to public?
The report, I'm not sure, but yes, at some stage or the other, the report will become public. There's no doubt about it. But let me answer the earlier part of your observations as such. Firstly, it is only an investigation which can determine as to what actually happened, right? I'm just trying to get you to picture that situation where you have fired upon, you're in an area, you have killed some people through a mistaken identity case. You're likely to be surrounded by a mob. There are people around you, etc. I don't look at the circumstances and consider that there is an opportunity here where people get a chance to hide something immediately. The idea would be in fact, what I'm led to believe is that some of these people who were injured were taken to hospital by the paratroopers themselves. It's not as if they were trying to hide those bodies. They were taken to hospital actually. So two of them admitted in the ICU itself. But it's a situation in which there's a life and death kind of a decision making which has to be done. It has to be done on the spur of the moment. It's a very, very awkward thing. And there's a young officer who's in command of all this, right? Keeping all that in mind, the fact that they were attempting to break out from there was a necessity, because you can't allow yourself to be lynched by a mob which could be 1,000 or more than that strong, right? So that is an essential thing. And the law, I think, Mr. Hegde would agree with me, the law will protect you in the case of self-defense. If someone is attempting, you have 10, 12, 15 people, a mob of 1,000 people is attempting to get hold of you because a mistaken identity killing has taken place, in that case, you are very well within your rights.
Okay, so hang on. This is important and this is interesting. I will ask Mr. Hegde to respond. So, but General Saab, in a civilian situation, and we know that there is a protocol to be followed. First of all, we know that we don't know the size of the mob or the angry protesters. Civilians call them angry protesters. You call them mob. We don't know the size of that group that came. We know that they were unarmed. Now, in a police operation, there's an SOP. You have to fire in the air. You have to give a certain number of warnings. If it still doesn't disperse the crowd, you fire on the ground, maybe at their feet, so disperse them. Firing at to kill is almost, I mean, there is a process to which that order is given.
Faye,
what is the process in the army?
Faye, I have been through this many times in my life.
Yes.
I can assure you one thing. Everything based upon the proximity of the so-called mob or whatever you want to call them. The proximity, how far are they from you, right? The army, in case of aid to civil authorities, normal aid to civil authorities, where the magistrate is in control, will refer the case to the magistrate, request him for permission to fire on the mob. Will fire one round, only one round. The army never fires in the air. It never fires in the air. It fires on the mob. Now, on the mob also, it will fire on a particular individual, and that too, the army is trained to fire at the lower part of the limbs. All this is part of procedure. They will do that. Now, that is a case of aid to civil authorities. This is counterinsurgency operations going on. You have to see the difference between the two.
But
the aid to
that's
civil
how
authority
it's
is completely
counted.
different.
This is a mistaken identity and then controlling a mob, right?
That's right.
Does
But
it
it's
still
in
qualify
it's in a CI area. It's in a counterinsurgency area.
Okay. So everything
Where
that-
any kind of eventuality can emerge from this. That's why. So
Okay.
they broke out from it. We don't know what the proximity of the mob was to them, but this is not a situation where they would fire on the feet and things like that. If they are being attempted to being lynched, they would probably fire back in self-defense. And it's not as if they're going to open automatic fire in a burst mode on to kill a couple of 50 or 100 people. It's just the minimum force. This is something taught as basics to the Indian Army. Everything has to be done in the form of a minimum force. Yeah.
Mr. Hegde?
Well, was it minimum force? You've had maximum impact. I was just listening to the general very carefully, and basically what he said was, you take out the ringleader, the mob normally disappears. Here seems to be a case where you got into a situation where you were surrounded by a crowd, and then precisely the Indian Army, with all its training, did something like what happened in Lakhimpur Kheri, where a rash drive-through just went over everyone. You do not have these kind of casualties. Where if 6 people died in the first part, and then the total death toll is 14, so that makes about 8 people dying in the second one.
The second act was subsequently the second act was an attempted attack on an Assam rifle post, virtually.
General Saab, you know it, I know it. This appears to be a lack of leadership, to say the very least. I respect the army greatly. I respect its leadership. But when there are things which have gone due to lack of training, due to an overexcited imagination, and this is where the real problem with the Armed Forces Act is, a feeling of immunity. We have the power to do it, and we can shoot our way out, and then the rest can take care of themselves. These things lead to a much greater problem. Yeah, I was looking through the history of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and the very statement of objects and reasons. There is an introduction before the statement of objects and reasons, and which says violence became the way of life in the northeastern states of India. So we have a sort of, that's parliament for you. I'm not blaming the army.
Can I explain this? You see, you have to understand the reality of this, Sanjay sir. I've been a battalion commander, a brigade commander, a division commander, and a corps commander under AFSPA, right? Under AFSPA. It is only when I reached the rank of a lieutenant general, a corps commander, that I actually opened the books, the law books, to read what is AFSPA. Before that, I was not even aware of it. So forget about a rifleman, a havaldar, and a JCO knowing what is AFSPA and that he's got protection and immunity from law. I can assure you this: if you have any belief in the integrity of the Indian Army, believe me, because I'm telling you, as a lieutenant general, 6 months into my command of the corps, when Mr. Omar Abdullah finally brought out the issue of AFSPA, was this issue actually brought to my thing, and I had to go into it in depth. That is why I am today empowered to speak to you. No one in the Indian Army is going to come and discuss on the Faye show. I can assure you.
General, are you telling me that while there are members of the army operating, and you said you called out all of the ranks up to lieutenant general, that the army doesn't conduct an initiation and tell you about this act that you're currently operating under?
The basics are there. The basics are there, right? But the manner in which AFSPA should be known otherwise, we are immune to it. We don't do it. We don't even look at it because we don't consider it as such an important aspect for the soldier to know. The soldier is into operations. He's into focus, right? He knows what he has to do operationally. But this aspect that is protected under law, is protected under this, etc., is hardly ever brought to the notice of soldiers. Let me admit it to you, right? And that is why I tell you that the Indian Army, accusing the Indian Army to say that because it is immune under law it chooses to use its weapons in a burst mode to enjoy itself playing video games with the lives of people may be a bit of a fallacy.
I never said that, General.
No,
I never
know
said
that.
that.
I'm not accusing that.
Oddly enough, Mr.
I never
Hegde,
said that.
find
No,
the General Saab's statement-
the general has actually made a few significant admissions. This is when my lawyer's training comes in.
Yes.
The Act is of 1958, and the Indian Army has been in counter-insurgency operations before 58 also. So if a unit or a brigade or whatever gets into counter-insurgency, and especially in these disturbed areas where you're going on for, surely there should be a certain familiarization with the law or the scheme. See, the problem, Faye, is this. The general is right. The soldier knows only operations. When you conduct operations outwards against the enemy, then you conduct it one way. There's nobody to ask questions. But when you are conducting it against your own civilian population, you are a creature of the law. You are bound by the law. And sorry, sir, ignorance of law is no excuse in law. That's how the legal system works. Maybe just this, that every unit or every group which gets into counterinsurgency must have a basic primer. And this act is not more than 2 or 3 pages.
Sanjay Saab, as I told you before, knowing this law as a senior commander, knowing the inner aspects of the law and being aware of it is a world of a difference, right? It's a world of a difference. We have an induction course at all, in all the CI areas. We have a CI school normally. We always carry out an induction training program there for a month or so, in which you are familiarized with these broadly. But what you are actually, jisko kehte hain na Hindi mein baal ki khal utarna by a good lawyer, that's exactly what you're doing here. Because what I'm trying to tell you is that this is not at the back of the mind of a soldier at all, that he is immune to law. It is not at the back of his mind. It's not in the psyche of a soldier. No, that you have to believe me.
No, I believe you. But General Saab, what you should also get is the fact that civilians in peacetime are accustomed to being ruled by the rule of law. When in a troubled area, they're interacting with the army, and especially an army which has been there for a long time in operations which it's not specifically designed for. Policing, counterinsurgency should normally be not the function of the armed forces. Nevertheless, because they are so-called disturbed areas within courts, the army comes in and it gets deadened. That's my point. It gets deadened because of this architecture of immunity. Ultimately, Saab, it is like this, that the soldier believes that his Saab will take care of him. The Saab believes that the ministry will take care of him, that the politician will take care of him. So, jo karna hai, us time, right in front of you, you do it. That is not how, in a civil society, run by the rule of law, as opposed to army rule.
This is not army rule. We are not even talking of army rule. Faye, what you have to understand from a military point of view is CI operations are in the zone of gray. It is not black and white like conventional operations. I cross the line of control. I'm on enemy territory or wherever I am. This is the zone of gray. And you have to appreciate that mistakes will be made. It's not as if mistakes are made every day. This is after years we are hearing of a mistake in Nagaland. The last time I heard of a major mistake well, we had the Hyderpura encounter recently. I'm not sure how the investigation in that is going, but we've had many other cases like this in the past. Basically mistakes and admitted mistakes, most of them. This is the whole idea that in such situations, if you want effectiveness, if you want operations to be conducted, and this is a national duty the army is doing. It's not doing it for its own health's sake. It's doing it as a national commitment. It's been tasked by the government of India, and therefore it is conducting its operations. And it's conducting its operations professionally. If there's a mistake in the pursuance of professional operations, that is the time when this immunity factor gets kicked in. And it doesn't happen every day.
Okay. So I find that, so I'm going to break that down because, and I'm still approaching this as a member of civil society. So what you're saying effectively is, you're saying if you want the army to operate counterinsurgency and do what it needs to do, you have to be willing to put up with a certain level of human error. In this case, human error tantamounts to the loss of 14 lives, not 1 or 2, 14 lives. Is that what you're saying, General Sir?
I want to first of all deeply regret from the army side. I'm not in uniform today, but I still want to say I deeply regret the loss of innocent lives, right? 14 lives, this is a huge cost. It's a huge cost. I don't want to quote examples, but it should be also just kept in mind. For example, the Americans in Afghanistan, the number of times they have shot civilians dead as a part of
not their own people. Not
no, I agree. It's not that. I agree.
Nagaland are our own people.
I agree. It's not their own people. But by and large, what I want to say is civilians who have been killed. You see, it's a civilian anyways, innocents who have been killed unnecessarily.
Give me a situation, General Saab, where Americans fire on their own people.
No, I'm not saying that. I never said that. I never said that. What I'm saying is they killed civilians, innocents. I'm only equating innocents, nothing else. But killing of 14 people, I agree, loss of 14 lives is a hugely regretful thing. But the army is not playing games here. Neither are the terrorists, neither are the insurgents.
Okay. So let me ask you a couple of questions.
This is a very, very awkward situation in which a one-off incident of this kind takes place. I mean, one is regretful of it. The government of India has regretted it virtually and called it a mistaken identity operation. Investigations are now going on into it. It's a question of the legalities of the investigation. That is the basic thing.
Yes. So let me then break this down and ask you, many of our audience is asking us questions about the intelligence failure. This is obviously an intelligence failure because even the Home Minister of the government pointed out in Parliament that there was a tip-off of a certain type of van, and this van sort of resembled that van. It didn't stop, which is why it got that reaction. The merits of that reaction is, of course, subject to investigation. But what happens when there is an intelligence failure of this kind, General Saab? Who's investigating it? Where is the accountability for that intelligence failure?
That is a separate matter. This is not an intelligence failure as such.
Okay.
You see, I don't count mistaken identities can't be taken as an intelligence failure. Intelligence failure is, how do you know that 500 yards behind these vehicles, the actual terrorists were actually traveling?
Okay.
Here it's happened that the army executed it perhaps a little early, and that's where the mistake is. And that is the mistake which is being investigated. The issue of intelligence failure doesn't arise here, Faye, at all.
Okay.
That's a non-issue here.
All right. There is an FIR that has been filed by the Nagaland police that says murder and attempt to murder in this case. Do you agree with those IPC sections being brought against this particular special ops force?
I'm not at all. This has happened also in Jammu and Kashmir. If you remember, just 3 years ago, when we had the case from my own regiment, an officer against whom an FIR was brought for having fired and killed 3 civilians in a particular village in which his men were going to be lynched by a mob once again, right? And there was an uproar in the country at that time also. Bringing in this prematurely at this time without an investigation at all, I think, first of all, AFSPA is very clear. It has to be cleared by the central government. If the central government has cleared anything, I'm happy. I go along with that, right? But without the clearance of the central government, if the local police have lodged an FIR and carrying out a new investigation or a subsequent prosecution, this is all illegal under AFSPA.
Do you believe, General Saab, that AFSPA needs to either be repealed in these areas or at least re-looked at after 1958?
That's the interesting question. That is the question which I came to answer for you here on this show, right?
Please go ahead.
You see, a perception has been created and it's being used by your adversaries, your enemies, everyone. It's being used by people across the line of control to paint the Indian army a villain in Jammu and Kashmir, for example. I'm not sure whether this is happening in the Northeast in that particular manner, but in Jammu and Kashmir, this is definitely happening. I am of the belief today, many aspects of the humanization of conflict are not even mentioned anywhere. You see, when this happened in 1990 in J&K and 1958 in the Northeast, since then, a lot of water has flown down various rivers, right? The Indian Army, for example, the Supreme Court in 1997 gave out a set of do's and don'ts. And these are on record. Why are these do's and don'ts included in the AFSPA today as an appendix so that the whole world can read it? And you say that the Indian Army needs to be trained on it. Let the Indian Army also read it. The do's and don'ts, which we anyway train our troops on. Number two, which army in the world, I would like to quote this to you, which army in the world follows an SOP in which if you have to search a house at night, I'm talking about Jammu and Kashmir, an SOP. If you have to search a house at night and if there are only women in that house, you will search it only with a woman constable, right? And if there's no woman constable available, you will search it with a local member of the clergy. If not available, you will have a person of an older generation to accompany the army. Well, which army does these kind of things? Why don't you put these SOPs down here for people to read and say the same army you accuse of carrying out acts of vengeance against civilians are also actually duty bound by these things. The third aspect, how many of us know about Operation Sadbhavana? Right, 1997 onwards, Operation Sadbhavana is in place. And 24 years down the line, the total humanization of conflict, the kind of assistance we are bringing to the civil population everywhere, right? And I'll take your minds back to 1996, the 10 commandments of the Chief of the Army Staff, which are directions to every soldier, which he must keep in his pocket, how to bring respect and dignity to the civilian. Now, these are the kind of things which need to be today built into this law to allow people to read it and understand that on one side, while the empowerment is there, while the protection is being given to the soldiers in the field in very, very difficult gray zone operations, there is also at the same time a set of guidelines. And if I put these down into writing, these guidelines will go to 20 pages. Against the 2 or 3 pages which Sanjay Hegde talks about, which is the total number of pages that AFSPA actually has. So this is the way I look at the whole approach to AFSPA in terms of perception. Not only will it change the perception of the world about India, it will change the perception of a lot of people about the army. And the army may change perception of itself. As you want us to do all this is correct. The army will also get sort of you're
saying it's relevant, but there are already guidelines being followed on the ground.
Absolutely. These are all guidelines which are there, which are already followed, which you are not aware of. I'm sure Sanjay Hegde is not aware of. It's people like me who are operating on ground who are aware of these.
Mr. Hegde, same question to you. Do you believe that AFSPA needs to either be repealed or modified or amended or updated?
No, see, it's a nice, short, crisp act. But an act basically is a question of political will. Now, if you decide that there are certain areas of peripheral areas of your country, the Northeast, Kashmir, this, that, and the other, where the rule of law can be suspended in the interest of army operations. The question is, for how long will that continue? How long will the population endure it? Are they lesser Indians? Will the rule of because whatever diminution of their freedoms happen, invariably it comes down onto the mainland. This was a particular law when we just about come out of shortly after independence, where there is a colonial state construct. Today, I do believe that while a certain measure of protection is needed, what is not needed is a sense of immunity or impunity, that only the central government can allow it. If there are certain gross incidents, the local police must definitely be involved. The local representatives must be involved, because after all, we live in a system of representative governance. What General Saab is basically arguing is that it was said about 2,500 years ago by Cicero, who said that in times of war, the laws are silent. The answer came around 1948, at least in Lord Atkins's judgment, where he said that in England, and I believe that's the position, that should be the position in India as well, In times of war as well as of peace, the laws are not silent. We cannot simply silence our people by silencing the laws. If a soldier is into counterinsurgency or into generally policing duties, he remains a creature of the law. And if he goes beyond what the law authorizes him, or if the law is so broadly worded that it authorizes him to shoot, to kill, and shoot his way out of circumstances, then as a society, we must relook at the law.
Also, Mr. Hegde, we are not at a counterinsurgency is one thing, but the citizens, the peaceful citizens of Nagaland are not at war. Is it for them to expected to continue to live like this for decades and decades?
Whether it's Nagaland, whether it is various portions of Arunachal, whether it is Jammu and Kashmir, they're all Indian citizens. And how far can we continue in this fashion, or how far can we expect them to continue in this fashion, is a question which invariably has to come and haunt the country. India is, with due respect to the armed forces and all that, India is one of the rare countries where in 1966, the Indian Air Force actually bombed Aizawl. That led to another 20, 30 years of conflict out there. So even outside the Imphal fort, the Manipuri women stripped in protest. With General Saab speaks about humanization of the army, but he does not possibly see so much of the dehumanization of civilians that has happened. So we both mean the same, want the same things for India. We want a powerful, peaceful India. But to bring it only out of that Mao quotation that power flows from the barrel of a gun, that is not the India that we are looking at.
Mr. Hegde, would it be helpful if the Army's investigations into these incidents were made public, which right now they're not? Civil society has no access to these.
Civil society has no access, nor to civil police. I think the army may very well consider, or more than the army, it would be the government which would have to consider some kind of modus vivendi, where the civil authorities are also included.
See, Hegde sir, one thing I will remind you, and Faye, the court of inquiry conducted by the army is available at the government of India. It's not as if only a uniformed person is going to see that inquiry. That inquiry is available to the government of India, to the due officials who are there, who will ultimately decide based on that also whether there is a requirement to actually authorize further investigation and prosecution. It's not as if the whole thing is closed within the army and within the Ministry of Defense.
But General Sir, my question is to civil society, to journalists, to human rights organizations, to the family members of the deceased.
That's up to the central government then to do. It is available with the central government. If it's required to be done, the central government will do it. But let me come back to one more observation. Yes. You see, we are at when I say we are at war, in Jammu and Kashmir, we have been in war for the last 30 years. I don't say Nagaland we are at war, but there's no proxy war going on there at the moment. But there's a tension, there's an air of tension. And the fact that the army has been authorized there, has been sent there, is primarily for the reason that the local police, the capability of the local police to control the situation is suspect. The army is there. Now, when the army is there, it requires certain powers, which are, in this case, only two things which I spoke of right in the beginning: empowerment and protection. No, the army is not the police. The army is not the police. And therefore, by the way, even for all other government officials, you cannot just prosecute a government official out of the blue like that. You will have to go back to the central government to take permission before you prosecute a government official as it is. And lastly, in a place like Jammu and Kashmir, for example, now I'm not talking about Nagaland, I'm talking about Jammu and Kashmir. Would I be comfortable in handing over a soldier of mine to the local authorities? I'm sorry, I will not. I will not be happy to do that. Because I know what the status is out there, what the situation on ground is there. There is an animosity against the nation. Forget about the army, it's against the nation. There is every day, there was in those days, every day a demonstration against Hindustan, against Bharat. Would I want to hand over my soldiers to them? Sorry, no, that's not done.
Mr. Hegde?
No, the General Saab is absolutely right. As far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, maybe he has his perception, he served there. But then because something is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, then should the same thing continue in Nagaland? Should it continue in Manipur? And the other question, tomorrow, God forbid, something happens in Tamil Nadu or something happens in Karnataka, our home state. Would we endure this for how long? And if we can't endure it, how can we ask our countrymen to endure it for all this time?
In fact, General Saab, I want your opinion, I want your response on a statement made by the BJP Nagaland state president on Sunday, where he basically said, and I quote, that the firing incident in Mon district was tantamount to war crimes during peacetime and amounts to a summary execution as well as genocide. These are strong words. What is your response?
These are very strong words, and in the wake of an incident of this nature, 14 people have died. It's not a simple thing. These kind of statements will come out. I mean, let's be realists, right? This will come out. Particularly from the political side, it will come out. Because this is an occasion which can be exploited for that also. But of course, as time will go and as some kind of a thing starts getting revealed as to what really happened here, the truth which happened here, probably feelings will start getting mollified to some extent. I'm not saying that it will get mollified. No, it's not easy to do that with people who have lost their loved ones, 14 of them. It's not easy for them to adjust themselves to this kind of a thing. But sentiments at the moment are high, and therefore statements of this kind are expected.
My final question to both of you before I let you go, I have 5 minutes more. Just up to you first. We do know, of course, that the army is geared in a certain way to handle situations that comes their way, and the civil police has to follow a different SOP. How long do you think the areas of India that continue to remain under AFSPA can continue to stay that way? Shouldn't they? The Supreme Court has said that you can't have this unendingly carry on for decades and decades. Should there be pressure on the central government to make sure that it stays within a certain cap of this is how long we will use it, and then after that we go back to civilian law and order?
No one can dictate this way. Everything is dependent and contingent upon the situation as it moves forward. The time we were so hopeful, but 5 years ago, when the framework agreement in Nagaland had brought about, and we were hopeful that in the next 2 to 3 years, they will see total peace in Nagaland. By now, AFSPA should have been blown to smithereens by now. It didn't happen. Today, there are 10 groups which are there in Nagaland. I hope you know there are 34 groups in Manipur. 34 groups who are operating in Manipur. We have got a seizure of operations with 50% of them, and the others are continuing to do their operations against us. How do you expect the army to operate here? You have to ask a person, do I have a seizure of operations with you or not? Otherwise, I'll fire it. How do you conduct operations in these areas? It's these are unimaginable situations. For people sitting in Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore, you can't imagine the kind of manner in which the soldier who steps out from his camp, he doesn't know what the next step is going to be. So let's also look with a little empathy at the soldier. That's my appeal to all of you.
Okay. Mr. Hegde?
Empathy is right. A blind eye is wrong.
Agreed with you. Completely agreed.
So the point is that I can sympathize with a young lieutenant who's there in charge of the operation or who has to get his Pulton back. Yes, but at the same point of time, there obviously were several errors, and you can't, in a manner of speaking, with due respect to you, General Saab, shooting from the lip, silence everybody down. So I'm
not a lawyer. I don't shoot.
Let me tell you, General Saab, you would have made a very fine lawyer, and you would have probably earned a ton of money and not the respect that you currently have. Yes, we do. It's not. It's the Indian Army is our army. But when the Indian Army is used against Indians, there has to be a certain modus operandi, which is very careful. And if after that there are still mistakes, those mistakes have to be explained in a satisfactory manner to all Indians. And the only way
those words of yours,
can be
I
done,
endorse. I endorse your every word you've spoken in the last few sentences. Well, I agree with that entirely. India needs to know what really happened, and there has to be transparency.
Faye, up to you.
Gentlemen, we're at 9 o'clock, so I want to thank both of you for your time. I do hope that the conversations that happen in very high places about this, as they're happening right now, whether in government, in cabinet, in parliament, maintain the same level of discourse that we have seen play out over the last 1 hour between the two of you. And for the people who live under AFSPA, and for our audience ones who are not familiar, do some research, read about it. There is a lot of literature available on the internet about various areas of the country that are currently under this act, how the civilians feel about it, how the politicians feel about it, how the army feels about it. It's our responsibility to understand this better and to understand it from all points of view. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for helping us understand this better. For our audience, the news is up at exactly 9 o'clock. Do take a look at it. Remember, it's just the news. There's no opinion in it at all. Not even an eyebrow raise. We try our best. Do take a look at it, and thank you for your support. For those who gave us the super chat, Rachna Chatwani and the others, the money will be used to pay salaries and to buy equipment to be able to give you the news better as a social service. Thank you for watching.
May I have the last word, Faye? May I have the last word? Sorry, I want to basically leave on this word, that I came with respect for you, and for Sanjay Saab, I leave even more respect. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. The same here, General.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.